They fined me $15,000 for taking care of something that wasn't even mine to begin with. That's what the letter said anyway. And the craziest part is they were right. At least, technically. I remember the exact moment I opened that envelope. It was a quiet Tuesday morning. One of those early spring days where the air still had a bite to it, but you could smell the thaw coming. I was standing in my kitchen, coffee in one hand, flipping through bills and junk mail, not expecting anything out of the ordinary, until I saw the state seal stamped in blue. I figured it was some kind of notice, maybe about property taxes or something routine. It wasn't. I read it once, then again. Then I set it down on the counter and just stared at it like maybe the words would rearrange themselves into something that made sense. They didn't. According to the Department of Environmental Resources, I was illegally controlling a regulated water structure on my land. A dam, they called it. And because I didn't have the proper permits, certifications, or engineering oversight, I was being fined $15,000. I actually laughed out loud at first, not because it was funny, but because it felt so ridiculous it had to be a mistake. See, the thing is, I didn't build that dam. It had been there long before I ever set foot on the property. I bought the land about 8 years earlier, out near a small town called Holbrook Ridge, tucked into the edge of the foothills. Nothing fancy, just a few acres, a modest cabin, and a stretch of creek running along the back corner. What sold me on it wasn't the house, it wasn't even the price. It was the pond. There was this small, quiet body of water right where the creek narrowed, held back by an old earthen dam. Not some big concrete structure, nothing like that, just a reinforced wall of packed soil and stone, with a spillway that kept the water moving gently. But it was beautiful. Early mornings, the surface would sit like glass, reflecting the trees and sky. You'd see deer come down to drink, herons wading near the edges, and sometimes neighbors would slow their trucks on the road just to take a look. It had a kind of stillness to it, like time moved a little slower there. And I took care of it. Not because anyone told me to, just because it seemed like the right thing to do. Every spring, after the snow melted, I'd walk down to the dam with a shovel and a pair of gloves. I'd clear branches and debris from the spillway, patch up spots where the soil had started to erode, pack things down where the water had loosened the structure. Nothing complicated. No machinery. Just basic upkeep. Honestly, I never even thought of it as operating anything. I was just maintaining what was already there, keeping it from falling apart. Because if it did, that peaceful pond would disappear. The creek would cut right through, drain everything out, and whatever ecosystem had built up around it would be gone. At least, that's what I believed at the time. Turns out, that belief is what cost me 15 grand. Now, a few weeks before that letter showed up, I'd had a couple visitors. 2 people from the state, wearing those official windbreakers with logos stitched on the chest. One of them was a woman, mid-40s maybe, sharp eyes, clipboard in hand. The other was younger, quieter, mostly taking photos and measurements. They introduced themselves politely enough. Routine inspection, the woman said. We're reviewing small water control structures in the county. I remember leaning on the fence, trying to figure out what exactly that meant. You mean the pond? I asked. The dam, she corrected. That should have been my first clue. They spent maybe an hour walking around, taking notes, asking questions about when it was built, whether I had documentation, permits, things I didn't have answers for. Because, again, I didn't build it. I bought the property like this, I told them. I just keep it from washing out. The younger guy nodded, like he understood. The woman didn't. She just scribbled something on her clipboard and said, "We'll follow up." And that was that. Or so I thought. Standing there in my kitchen weeks later, staring at that letter, I could feel this slow, creeping frustration settling in. Not the loud kind, not anger exactly, more like disbelief mixed with something heavier. Because it didn't feel fair. I wasn't running a business. I wasn't generating power or diverting water for irrigation. I wasn't profiting off that dam in any way. If anything, I was preventing a problem. So I called them. I remember pacing back and forth across the living room while the phone rang, already running through what I was going to say in my head, trying to keep it calm, reasonable. When someone finally picked up, I explained everything. This structure was here before I bought the land, I said. I'm not using it for anything. I've just been maintaining it so it doesn't fail. There was a pause on the other end. Then the same woman's voice. I recognized it immediately. Sir, she said, calm as ever. If you are not the registered operator of that dam, you are not authorized to perform maintenance. I actually stopped walking. What? Any activity that alters or preserves the function of a regulated water structure can be considered operational control. I let that sink in for a second. So, you're saying the reason I'm being fined is because I've been trying to keep it from collapsing? Another pause. Then, flat and matter of fact. Yes. There it was. No sarcasm, no hesitation, just a clean, bureaucratic answer that somehow made everything feel even more absurd. I rubbed my forehead, trying to process it. What happens, I asked slowly, if I just stop? You are not required to maintain a structure you are not authorized to operate. That answer hit different. Not because of what she said, but because of what she didn't. She didn't say the dam had to be preserved. She didn't say there would be consequences if it failed. She just left the door open. And for the first time since that letter showed up, I started to see a way out. Not by fighting them, not by paying engineers or applying for permits I didn't even want, but by doing exactly what they told me to do. Nothing. I thanked her, hung up the phone, and stood there in the quiet for a long moment, listening to the faint sound of water moving out back. Then I grabbed my jacket, walked down toward the creek, and looked at that dam a little differently than I ever had before. Not as something I needed to protect, but as something I was finally allowed to let go. And that decision, simple as it seemed at the time, that's what changed everything. I didn't make some big announcement about it, didn't stand there and declare anything dramatic. I just stopped showing up. That was it. Spring came around like it always does. The snow melted up in the hills, and the creek started running stronger, louder, carrying bits of branches and silt down from upstream. Normally, that's when I'd head out there with my boots half-laced, coffee still warm in a thermos, ready to clear out whatever had piled up along the spillway. But that year, I stayed on the porch. At first, it felt wrong, like ignoring a leaky roof during a storm or hearing a strange noise in your car and choosing to turn the radio up instead. There's this instinct, this built-in sense that if something needs attention, you give it attention. And every time I heard the water pick up after a rain, I'd catch myself thinking, I should go check it. But then I'd remember the phone call, that calm, steady voice telling me I wasn't allowed to. So I didn't. I'd sit there instead, watching the tree-lean sway, listening to the creek do whatever it was going to do, telling myself I was just following instructions. Funny thing is, doing nothing takes effort. More than you'd think. A couple weeks into it, my neighbor, Carl, came by. Older guy, retired mechanic, lived about half a mile down the road. He had one of those faces that always looked a little sunburned, like he'd spent his entire life outdoors. He leaned against the fence, squinting toward the pond. You haven't been down there, he said. It wasn't a question. I shrugged, taking a break. Carl let out a low grunt, like he didn't quite buy it. Water's running high this year, he added. Saw a lot of debris coming through last night. Yeah, I said. I noticed. He waited a second, probably expecting me to say I'd handle it. I didn't. Finally, he nodded slowly, pushed himself off the fence, and muttered, well, your land. But there was something in the way he said it. Not judgment exactly, more like curiosity mixed with concern. Because everyone around here understood one simple thing. If you don't take care of something long enough, nature will. And not in a gentle way. By early summer, the first signs started showing up. Nothing dramatic at first, just little changes. The spillway, which used to guide water neatly over the top, started collecting more debris than usual. Branches, leaves, even a small log at one point. All of it catching and slowing the flow in ways it wasn't designed to. Normally, I would have cleared that out in 10 minutes. Now it just stayed there. Water began pushing against the sides instead of moving cleanly through. You could see it, if you stood at the right angle, the way it pressed and searched for weak spots. And the dam, old as it was, had plenty of those. One afternoon, I walked down there. Not to fix anything, just to look. I told myself that was allowed. The ground felt softer under my boots than it used to. When I got closer, I noticed small rivulets forming along the face of the dam, thin lines where water had started carving its own path through the soil. I crouched down, ran my fingers along one of them. It wouldn't take much. That thought just kind of settled in. Not much at all. For a moment, I actually considered grabbing a shovel, packing the soil back in, reinforcing the edge like I'd done a dozen times before. It would have been easy. Automatic, almost. But then that sentence echoed back again. You are not authorized to perform maintenance. I stood up, brushed the dirt off my hands, and walked away. By July, the changes weren't subtle anymore. The pond level started dropping, slowly at first, then more noticeably. What used to be a clean edge along the shoreline turned into patches of exposed mud and grass. The water lost that still, mirror-like surface, replaced by uneven ripples and shifting currents. Wildlife changed too. The herons stopped showing up. Deer still came through, but less often, like they sensed something was off. Even the sound was different. That quiet, steady hush of water had turned into something more restless, uneven, like the whole system was adjusting in real time. Carl came by again one evening, this time with a six-pack in hand. We sat on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the trees. He nodded toward the back of the property. She's not holding like she used to, he said. No, I replied. You gonna fix it? I took a slow sip, letting the question hang there for a second. Not allowed to. He turned his head, eyebrows pulling together. What do you mean? So I told him. The inspection, the letter, the fine, the phone call. Carl listened without interrupting, just staring out toward the tree line like he was picturing the whole thing. When I finished, he let out a short laugh. Not because it was funny, but because it was the only response that made sense. So let me get this straight, he said. You keep it from breaking, they fine you. You let it break, and that's fine. Seems that way. He shook his head slowly. Hell of a system. We sat there in silence for a while after that, both of us listening to the distant sound of water pushing harder than it used to. Then he said something that stuck with me. You ever notice, he muttered, how sometimes the only winning move is not to play? I didn't answer, because deep down, I already knew that's exactly what I was doing. By late summer, the dam looked tired. That's the only way I can describe it. The edges had softened, the structure uneven, like something that had been holding on out of habit more than strength. The spillway had widened, not by design, but by force, water carving its own route wherever it could. And every time it rained, things got a little worse. Not all at once, just enough that you could see the direction it was heading. I started checking the weather more often. Not because I was planning to act, but because I knew, eventually, something was going to give. And part of me wanted to be ready for it. Then fall rolled in. Cooler air, heavier storms, the kind that sit over the hills for hours, dumping more water than the ground knows what to do with. The night it happened, I didn't see it. I heard it. It must have been around 2 in the morning. I woke up to this low, distant rumble, not thunder exactly, more like something shifting, collapsing, followed by a sudden rush of water that didn't sound like anything I'd heard before. I sat up in bed, listening. There was a moment, just a few seconds, where everything went quiet again. And then it came. A deep, continuous roar, like the creek had found a new voice overnight. I knew right then. I didn't need to go outside. Didn't need to check. After months of holding on by a thread, the dam had finally given way. And just like that, it wasn't my problem anymore. I didn't rush outside that night. That's probably the part people don't expect. You'd think I'd grab a flashlight, throw on boots, run down there to see what happened, but I didn't. I just sat on the edge of the bed, listening to that new sound rolling through the dark, steady, powerful final. Because deep down, I already knew what I was going to find. And there was something strangely calm about it. Not relief exactly. Not satisfaction either. Just a quiet understanding that whatever line had been stretched for months had finally snapped, and there was no going back. I lay back down after a while, stared at the ceiling, and listened to the creek rewrite itself until I drifted off again. Morning came slow. Gray sky, damp air, that kind of silence that follows a storm when everything feels a little rearranged. I made coffee like I always do, stood by the window for a minute longer than usual, then finally headed out. The walk down to the creek felt different. Not physically. The same path, same trees, same uneven ground, but there was this weight in it, like I was walking toward the end of something I'd been part of for years. When I got there, I stopped, just stood there for a while without moving. Because the pond was gone. Not drained like a bathtub, not half-empty gone. Where there had been still water reflecting the sky, there was now a wide stretch of wet grass, exposed stones, and a channel of moving water cutting right through the middle. The creek had carved itself a new path, deeper and more direct, like it had been waiting for the chance. The dam, what was left of it, barely looked like a structure anymore. Part of the wall had collapsed completely, the rest slumped and uneven, already starting to blend back into the landscape it came from. You could still see where it used to stand, but only if you knew what you were looking for. Otherwise, it just looked natural, like it had always been that way. I walked closer, stepping carefully over the soft ground, listening to the water rush past in a way it never had before. Louder, faster, alive in a different way. And I'll be honest, I felt something I didn't expect. I missed it. That quiet pond, the still mornings, the way everything used to gather there, it was gone. Just like that. All those years of keeping it together, undone in a single night. But right underneath that feeling, there was something else. Something lighter. Because for the first time since that letter showed up, I wasn't responsible for anything down there. No maintenance. No inspections. No fines hanging over my head. Just a creek, doing what creeks do. A couple days later, Carl came by again. Didn't even knock this time. Just walked straight around to the back like he already knew. We stood there side by side, looking at it. Well, he said after a while, that answers that. Yeah. He nudged a loose rock with his boot, watching it roll into the water and disappear. Funny thing, he added. Looks like it belongs more now than it did before. I glanced at him. You think so? He shrugged. Nature's got a way of correcting things. We didn't talk much after that. Didn't really need to. Because whatever had happened had already made its point. About 3 weeks later, I got another visit. Same department. Same truck. And sure enough, same woman stepping out with that clipboard in hand. She looked exactly like I remembered, composed, professional, unreadable. If she recognized me, she didn't show it. Morning, she said. Morning. They walked the property again, just like before. Only this time, there wasn't much to inspect. No structure. No spillway. No controlled water level. Just a natural stream cutting through open ground. I followed a few steps behind, hands in my pockets, saying nothing. The younger guy took a few photos, pointed at different spots, made some notes. The woman stood near what used to be the center of the dam, looking down at the water for a long moment. Then she turned to me. Has there been any recent construction or removal activity on this site? She asked. I shook my head. No, ma'am. That wasn't a lie. She studied my face for a second, like she was measuring something, not the words, but the intent behind them. Then she nodded once. Based on current conditions, she said, flipping a page on her clipboard, this appears to be a naturally restored waterway. There is no longer a regulated structure present on the property. I let that sit for a moment. Then I asked, as calmly as I could, so what does that mean for the violation? She didn't hesitate. With no structure in place, there is no basis for enforcement. Just like that. No apology. No acknowledgement of what it had taken to get there. Just a clean, procedural conclusion, like closing a file. I nodded. Understood. They packed up, got back in their truck, and drove off without another word. And that was the last I heard about the fine. No follow-up letter. No bill. Nothing. It just disappeared. $15,000, gone, because the thing they said I wasn't allowed to control no longer existed. I stood there for a while after they left, looking out over what used to be the pond. The grass had already started to grow thicker in places, filling in where the water once sat. The creek moved steadily through its new path, not rushing like it had the night of the collapse, just flowing, like it had settled into itself again. You'd never guess, standing there now, that there used to be a dam, that there used to be a quiet little pond people would slow down to admire, that I spent years taking care of it. It was like none of that had ever happened. And maybe that's the part that stuck with me the most. Not the fine, not the frustration, not even the loss of the pond, but how quickly something you think you're responsible for, something you believe you're protecting, can vanish the moment you step back and let it. Sometimes by force, sometimes by design, and sometimes because the rules say you're not allowed to do anything else. I still walk down there every now and then. Not as often as I used to, but enough. Just to listen. The creek sounds different now, but not worse. Just honest. Like it's no longer being held in place by something it didn't choose. And I guess that leaves me with a question I still don't have a clean answer to. Was I wrong for maintaining that dam in the first place, trying to preserve something man-made because it felt right? Or was I wrong for letting it fail, knowing exactly what would happen if I stepped away? I did what they told me to do. Exactly what they told me. And in the end, everything worked out, at least on paper. But that pond is still gone. And sometimes, standing there listening to that water move through the grass, I can't help but wonder, was that really the better outcome? Or just the easier one? If you've made it this far, I'm curious what you think. Would you have done the same thing, followed the rules, and let it collapse? Or would you have fought it, spent the money, kept the pond alive no matter what? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because honestly, I still go back and forth on it.